Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special program with our guest, Kenneth Gloss. I am Amy Pickard, the Rare Book Curator for the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, and I'm delighted to host this program. Thank you all for joining us to talk with Ken about one of our favorite subjects, rare books. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our special guest. Everyone attending will be muted during the presentation to avoid distractions. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box and we will get to as many as we can. We did receive several items in advance for Ken's review and appraisal, so we'll do our best to talk about those at the end of today's program. This program is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it again later on the library's Facebook and YouTube channels and share the link with your networks. Now, about our guest. Kenneth Gloss is the second generation owner of the internationally known Brattle Book Shop located in downtown Boston, Massachusetts, and cited by Yankee magazine for its Editor's Choice Award for the Best of New England, along with many other awards. The bookshop was established circa 1825. It is one of the oldest and largest antiquarian bookstores. The year 2021 is the 72nd year of Gloss family ownership of the bookshop, with Ken succeeding as proprietor his late father, George, a well-known figure in Bostonian and national antiquarian circles. Ken continues his father's tradition of leadership with membership in the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, AA, or ABAA for short, the Committee for the Boston International Antiquarian Book Fair, and the Board of Overseers of the U.S. Constitution Museum, and many other organizations. He has appeared as a guest appraiser on the popular and favorite PBS show, Antiques Roadshow. He's been there on that numerous times. He's a frequent commentator on radio, TV, and cable programs, and has been widely published on various antique journals and consumer publications. His new broadcast, Brattlecast, is available in iTunes and through the bookshop's website, www.brattlebookshop.com. Ken, we are delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here. So let's turn the mic over to you now.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm happy that I can be there. I love doing these talks live. I'm hoping very soon we get to the point where I could actually be at the library. But in any case, Zoom works. And what I do in the talk is I will talk for about 45 minutes or so. I'll talk a little more about my background in the store. And what I tend to do a lot is tell stories, anecdotes of the people, places, things we've seen. Try to give an idea of what a used and rare bookshop is like. And also then I allow about 15, 20 minutes for question and answer, which will come off the chat line. And I will do some appraisals. I will say though, if anybody has questions that we don't get to or appraisals we don't get to, feel free to get in touch, phone, mail, email, website, and I will do everything I can to answer. But in any case, the history of the store does go back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the store. And my father built the store through his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge. He was also a bit of a character and a showman. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And every time my father would move, when it was a planned move, he would move the best books over to his new location. And then he'd run sales, half price, dollar, quarter, 50-cent dollar, dime. And the last day of the sale, everything was free. And he literally had hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell. People go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. They'd leave. The next group would come in. And he gave away over 250,000 books that way. He used to like to say, I cast my books upon the water, and they came back 1,000-fold. But the last time he did this, for any of you who know downtown Boston at all, we were moving from the end of West Washington Street near Boston City Hall to west where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And my father, like I said, was a character and a showman. He hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go west, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Book Shop." Loaded it up with books, and they drove it from Boston City Hall up Court Street by Tremont, where the Boston Common is, to West Street, where we are now, and back down Washington with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He had gotten his point across, and we've been on West Street since then. And when we first moved in, we were a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call that the building was on fire. Literally, it burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone, but we wanted to keep going, continue. We found a storefront a few doors up the street, rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. We opened a month later. It was a meager stock, but the main thing was keep going. 4 years after that, we were rebuilding the store, but we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general secondhand bookstore, especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, read books, sell books, but particularly in the cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s. I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their early 30s. I don't think they plan on coming into it the way I did. And I've done this all my life. My parents say my first word was book. That I don't know. Maybe it was. I'm sure they were talking about them. And I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I actually have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctorate at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been 8 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the wonderful things about a store like this is people ask me, how do you keep it going? Well, first of all, we own the property, which is probably the key thing. But people think about running a used bookstore and they think of it much like opening an inn in Vermont or the restaurant they wanted. It's a lot of work. It's a business. One of the key things in a business, you got to make money. It's not sitting there and sort of behind the front desk, with a pipe, reading a book. Well, people don't smoke as much now anyways, but it's a lot of time, effort. My wife says I only work half a day, 12 hours. I get in at 5:30 in the morning, we close at 5:30. Yeah, it's half a day. And the other thing that you don't think about, a lot of people when they say, boy, we'd like to do this, is if you buy 1,000 books in a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to move 1,000 books out of a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. But what makes it exciting more is sort of the hunt and the finds and the people and the characters. As a matter of fact, even the people who work here, like I say in this, I tell a lot of stories, but we had an employee, this was years ago, and he had worked for us for a few days. He was a new employee. And an older man came into the store. Now, that older man is probably younger than I am now, but he was an older man. And he asked for an obscure author called Doniford Yates, who was a novelist. I knew who Doniford Yates. We went over to the section, looked, I didn't have any. I said to him, do you want to leave your name? We can let you know when some come in. He goes, no, I'll stop in later. He leaves. Then my new employee walks up to me. He goes, does that man come in here often? And I said, I really wasn't paying attention, but no. He goes, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And it was like, so you never know what it is. And the same employee, one of the greatest, or I don't know if it's the greatest, one of the most memorable introductions that I've ever had, he gave me. About a month after he worked for us, my wife had 4 tickets to the Celtics game, and we were going to go. And we said, Hugh, would you like 2 tickets? And he said, sure, but I'll have to meet you there. I'll bring somebody. We get there. He's sitting there with this woman. We walk in. He goes, oh, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? So it's the people, the characters, and everybody who comes in. And one of the things that we really emphasize when people are working is you never know who this next person is going to be, and treat them well. We had a man when I first started in the 70s who came in, and he told me he had come in and my father had been nice to him. He had gone to the business school in Boston, and he was a vice president of a bank in North Carolina. Now, I hate to say this, but everybody's a vice president of a bank. But anyways, he came in, he liked books. He would every once in a while call. He knew I got into work early. He said, look, I'm going to New York. I can take an early shuttle and then get to Boston by 7 in the morning. And then I can look and then get on a plane back to North Carolina. And would that be all right? And I said, sure. And over the years, very nice guy. But then as time went on, he would be a senior vice president, an executive vice president. Then his bank merged. And then he was president of Bank of America. So, and he'd still call me up and say, can I come in early in the morning? And so you never know who you're going to meet and characters. And a lot of the fun for me is going out to houses and estates. You never know who you're going to meet, what you're going to see. And I'll relate a few of those stories and then intermix them. I'll also talk a little about the Antiques Roadshow, which now I've done 20 years almost. But we got a call from a lady. I was out, there was a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called. She had some books in Rhode Island, in Providence, and that's only an hour from Boston. It wasn't very far. She said, oh yes, I called her up and she said, my father died. It's 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price. We're inviting a number of dealers down. Would you be interested? I was more than happy to go down. 500 art reference books sounds good. They lived in an old house on an old street up near Brown University. Got to the house, it was a large old colonial house. They led me through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought about 80% of the books I wanted. I was pleased, she was happy, and she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university, some are being sold at auction, but would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't touch this, go there, and just wandering through the whole place. It was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, I do hundreds of free appraisals. Matter of fact, my goal is that whenever you think of old books, that you think of me in the Brattle Book Shop. And one of the ways I think, I don't care if you think of 10 others, one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. But there are times when you need to give a formal written appraisal for insurance, state taxes, whatever. Then I discuss a fee. In other words, in any case, another mansion, this was in Newport also, but it was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. And you'd read through these papers, the day-to-day accountings. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. About 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So that's changed a lot. We got in a call when my father was still alive, and he died over 35 years ago. But we got a call. A lady was vague about what she had. She was relatively close by. And so we decided we'd go out to her house. We got to the house, little ranch house, paint was peeling, weeds were growing. And you sort of say to yourself, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful things. Turned out she was originally from New England, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution. And she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on. And she even said how T.E. Shaw used to visit them and stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were pastoral European scenes. When we first got in, I looked at them, I thought they were nice. The more she talked, the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she turned around and sort of matter-of-factly said, oh, yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original, probably $1 million worth of paintings. And it was like, oh, yes. So you never know, and people and the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, a few years ago, we went to a number of years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo is a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. He said he was a young man and looking forward to this dinner. And he said he got to the table a little early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was quite elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, sat down opposite, and he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, my, Tom, you look very good. And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, it's the Carter's little liver pills. This man said all they did all night long is yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. I can tell stories like that of places. I'll tell one more, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the first editions and people have asked about. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions we can answer right off the top of our head. Some of them are a little more involved. Occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago, and a lady, I answered the phone, hello, Brattle Book Shop, and a lady says, in a thicker Irish brogue, a little bit elderly, and the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. Now you have to admit that gets your attention. She stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. 20th century handwritten later are fairly hard to get, rare and expensive. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was skeptical, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great. The stories were great. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer for them, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. Letters were part of her life. I left a note behind. Maybe someday I'll hear about them again. I think her family still has them. So you never know what's going to show up. And a lot of it, too, is people who have collected for years and come in. I remember there was one dealer who was a manuscript and autograph dealer, one of the most prominent in the world. And he was telling me that when he was a young boy, he collected books by Robert Frost. And he knew Robert Frost. And he said when he was 13 years old, he went to London and he bought a copy of Frost's first book called A Boy's Will. Very complicated, what really is the first edition, and hard to find. He paid a lot of money for it, came back to New England. A few weeks later, he met with Frost. He said to him, look what I've got. And he held it up and was very proud of himself. Frost looked at it, said, what did you pay for it? And he told him, and Frost said, give me the book. Frost opened it up, and the front two end papers wrote a 2-page description of how to tell the first binding from the second binding, from the third binding, from the fourth, how they change bindings, why they change bindings, the different colors of the bindings, on and on and on for 2 pages, signed it, closed the book, handed it back to the boy and said, now it's worth what you paid for it. And there are a lot of nuances that can add or subtract to the value of books. Some of them are the condition. The paper dust jacket on a 20th century book can make all the difference in the world. A first edition of Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic, is, well collected and people seeking it. First edition, good condition, without the jacket, you're talking anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 or 4,000, maybe 5 if it's perfect. Have one with a perfect dust jacket, you could be talking $150,000 to $200,000. So that paper jacket in good condition is actually worth $100,000, $150,000. One of the reasons it adds so much is, first of all, it was a very flimsy jacket made on terrible paper. The colors tend to fade immediately. So unless that book has never been touched, never been held, never been read, you never find it. And it was a book that people read. So you just don't get it. Now, just opposite that, my father one time had a copy of F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, first edition, terrible condition, no dust jacket. But when you opened it up, it was inscribed to the greatest living poet, T.S. Eliot, sincerely F. Scott Fitzgerald. And then T.S. Eliot went on to annotate almost every page of the book, made marginal notes, crossed things out, added things in. That book now would be worth $200,000 or $300,000. So there are things that can make or not make a book. Rarity. There are a lot of books that can be incredibly rare, but the people who are looking for them are even rarer, and they don't have any great value. On the other hand, some of the books like Stephen King, Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, which is a good one for Buffalo, can be available in many cases, but there are a lot of people looking for them. Therefore, the prices go up. And so there are a lot of things that go into the price of a book. Some authors are almost impossible to get their signature. Earlier, I was talking about J.D. Salinger. He was reclusive. He lived in New Hampshire. and other than to close personal friends, absolutely would not sign a book. Thus, his signature adds thousands of dollars. On the other hand, there was a local author in New England. His name was Edward Rose Snow. If you're not from New England, you probably don't know him, but he was a friend of my father's. And I remember he came into the store once. He said he had just been on Cape Cod. He had gone into a bookstore that he had never been in before. Edward Rose Snow walked up to the section where his books were, pulled one off the shelf, opened it up and looked at it and exclaimed, "My, a rare, unsigned copy." And then he pulled out a pen and signed it. And then he introduced himself to the owner of the store. So some authors, you get a lot of their books. And a lot of times too, it's the characters and the people. We have an outside table. And well, actually, I'll tell you a few other stories and then get to this one. Sometimes people ask me if I collect books. And actually, I don't. Well, I don't for the most part. When I was growing up, my father used to bring home 5, 6, 10 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years. And you can imagine what our house looked like. He always meant to read a page, a subject, a chapter, a book jacket, whatever. We had piles and piles. So I tend to read a lot. I read a lot about books, book collecting, science fiction, Stephen King, John Grisham. I have a whole story about John Grisham too, which I will try to get to. But so I tend to read them and bring them back to the store. But my wife had a collection of about 1,000 books on jazz and signed studio photos of jazz musicians. So I always had something to get her for Christmas, for her birthdays. But one collection started as a bit of a joke. In the 19th century, early 20th century, a lot of books had dust jackets. But before they really had dust jackets, a lot of them were very beautifully designed covers. And the reason for that is the book's publisher wanted it to catch your eye when you walked into a store. So they had pretty covers and people collect them just for the covers. Individually, they don't seem like a lot, but a lot of them as a collection graphically can be quite nice. And I'm sure you can go to book sales, yard sales, bookstores and get them cheaply. Some are expensive, but in any case, I got a book one day, had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title of the book was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper, invented the toilet. Brought it home, showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, "We have to put this in the bathroom." So we did. A few days later, I got another book, had a picture of an eye staring out of it. The cover title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now this is a little half bathroom, so there's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are about 400 of these Victorian style illustrated books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable because every once in a while a book falls off the shelf and you can imagine where it ends up. Another collection that my father had, and one of the things I like to point out when people are collecting, you usually think of, okay, how much is this worth? How high is this? What's the value of it? But a lot of collections aren't always about the price of something. It's something that sort of grabs you, that's interesting, that for one reason or other, whoever's collecting it, they like it. And a lot of the fun of it is the hunt and the search. It's being able to go to every library book sale, every bookstore, every auction, every roadside antique store, and always hoping around that next corner you'll find something. And the reality is, I know collectors who have been looking for things sometimes for years and years and years, and then they find it, and it's almost disappointing because now they can't look for it anymore. Although anyone that's obsessive, they usually have a pile of other things. But we buy books mostly from houses and estates. That's how we go out. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day, never knowing what you're going to see. And most of those collections I can go through quickly. But when my father died and I had to go through his, it took me a long time. But at the end, there was a box that had about 500 old 8x10 movie studio photos, 8x10 photos of different movies over the years. And I'm going, I didn't think my father had that much interest in the old movies. I mean, I know he liked them. And I was starting to look, and I started looking at it, and I realized every single one of those photos had a book in it. It might be the star holding a book. It might be reading to a child. It might be a child with a book. It might be a picture in the background with a book. It might be a picture in the background that has a picture of a book in it. But all of these 500 movie stills he had collected over the years, and it was a fun collection, but it wasn't valuable. It was just something that people liked and enjoyed. A couple of things too over the years that aren't necessarily things that I've gotten to buy, but are a lot of fun, and just that I had to do either appraisals or getting things. I one time got called by a local museum, and they were loaning a document to another museum, and they just needed an insurance price. And they asked me if I'd do it. I'm a member of the museum. I told them I'll do it for free, but I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the original. So they said, fine, no problem. So at one point I was sitting there holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere that he wrote a week after the ride. And I'm sitting there holding this, and it's, you touch and hold things like that. One time we went into an attic, and there was a trunk. At the bottom of the trunk, there was an envelope. In the envelope were 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Adams. But the one letter that I really liked, and I knew I had something, because I used to bring things home to my children and show it to them, and they go, Dad's bringing home another old book. But this was a letter from 1812. Thomas Jefferson was talking about how to treat traitors and terrorists. This was just after 9/11. And he actually used those words. And he said they should get the full protection of the law and absolutely nothing else. In the War of 1812, there were many Americans who had wanted the English to win the Revolution, and they wanted them to win the War of 1812. And so that was Jefferson. But you're holding something and touching something that Jefferson held, that someone else held. Another great item that I had to appraise once was a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. It's the classic book on mathematics. It was a first edition. A first edition now goes in the $1 million range. I mean, it's incredible. But the main thing about this one, this was Isaac Newton's copy that he made marginal notes in all throughout the book. So again, I'm holding a book that Isaac Newton, first edition, and that he had written in and held, and that type of thing. That's part of what the collecting is. And even though I do this every day, that's what I do, it still sends a tingle up your spine. I'll talk a little bit for a few minutes about Antiques Roadshow, and then I see about some questions. I assume we have a few. So, and I'll actually maybe do a couple of the appraisals before, and then do another one. Antiques Roadshow is a lot of fun. I hope everybody watches it. I love it. I've been appraising on it for about 20 years. And one of the great things about the show is you get to travel all over the country. Now, what people might not realize is it's public television. They don't pay us anything. They don't pay the flight, the hotels, the dinner. All of the appraisers go on their own dollar and dime, but you get good publicity from it, and you get to see things, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, why would I go to Fargo or Bismarck or Omaha? And anywhere you go in this country, I don't care what it is, where it is, if you spend a little bit of time and make any type of effort, it's beautiful. And the people are really nice. Don't talk about politics and religion. That is probably keeps things on a better. And usually we're very lucky because my wife comes with me on most shows, and we can go a few days early and actually see it. Also, we go out to dinner with other appraisers, become friends. But the way the show works is they did it in convention centers. Now they're doing it at museums, libraries, other places. And you appraise on a one day. A lot of times it's a Saturday. Once in a while it's a weekday. And there are like 3 book appraisers next to the jewelry appraisers, next to the print appraisers, next to the so on in the wherever it's being held. And there are 2, 3, 5,000 people who come to a show. You appraise from about 7:30 in the morning, sometimes till 6, 7 in the evening. Each person brings 2 items. So somewhere between 6, 10,000 items come in. And you get, and they tape about 100 items. Some are very short, some are longer. And that's what makes up 3 hours of television. But the other thing is almost nothing is prearranged at all. So as an appraiser, you've paid your way to get there. You've paid for the hotel, you've paid for dinners, but you have no guarantee that you're going to get on TV. You know, if someone brings in something really interesting that you think is good, you tell them, would you like to be on TV? They say, okay. You call a producer over. A producer comes over, talks to the appraiser, out of earshot of the person, then talks to the person, and they either say, this sounds good, yes, go, no, don't. And for an appraiser, if you ever go to an event and you come in early and you have something that gets taped, the appraiser is thrilled, because if you appraise at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, and get it something taped, then the rest of the day is really easy, because you know you've already taped something. Whereas if it's getting to be 4 or 5 in the afternoon for an appraiser and you haven't taped anything, there's a good chance you could go home and not get taped. So one of the cities, and I think this was Kansas City, a man came in with something, and I'm looking at it. It was something from Pope Paul back in the 70s. And it was nice, nothing special. And then he got to talking, and it turned out he was the pilot that flew the Pope and his entourage all around the country when the Pope visited America. And he showed a photograph of him in his pilot's uniform in the pilot's seat, with the Pope leaning over with one leg up in the air in all his vestments, reaching over his arm and signing the pilot's Bible. And the more I'm hearing this, and so he's telling some story, I'm going, this is fabulous. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. This is a fabulous story. You know, usually you see the person in front of the Pope kneeling and kissing his ring, and it's very formal. Here he is, he's one leg up in the air, he's signing the Bible. And I go, yeah, great, let me see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? And he goes, no, it's locked in a safe deposit and his bank's closed. And I'm going, oh, but, you know, so that never made it to TV. And so from an appraiser point of view, there's a lot of things that come in. There are a lot of nice people. And one of the things that people don't realize about doing a lot of these appraisals is you think that all day long, a lot of people, you're saying to them, either on an Antiques Roadshow or when I do library or people coming into the shop, and you tell them it's not worth anything. And I've learned how to tell that nicely or directly. You'd think they'd be really disappointed. And actually, more people than not are thrilled. They go, great. Now I can give it to the grandchildren. Now I can donate it to the library sale. Now I can read it. Because a lot of people, if they think it's really, really valuable, they can't read it. And obviously, if I tell them it's worth thousands and thousands of dollars, they're happy too. But a lot of times, they're very happy that it's not worth something. And interesting things, the books that come in, since I already said condition is important, the ones that are most often in the poorest condition are children's books because of who reads them, and cookbooks because of how they get used. Matter of fact, you can a lot of tell by splatter marks what the good cookbooks are. And children's books are funny because we, a few years ago, had a first edition of Make Way for Ducklings. absolutely pristine. I mean, perfect dust jacket. Absolutely. Nobody had ever touched this book. We sold it for $20,000. At the same time, I had another copy of it that had crayon marks through it, pages turned back. And I was a little bit thinking to myself, which one of those is really the most valuable? And is it the one that was the $20,000 one, or is it the one that got well read? And this is something that also comes up. People have asked me, well, what's your favorite book? What's the thing that the most valuable book to you? And I could talk about, Indian books of North America, that fabulous photographs, signed things, letters and documents. But this was stolen from one of my colleagues on the Roadshow who is from New York. I heard him answer the question once, and I said, a bell went off, and I said, that's not only the right answer, but it's the answer that means the most to me. And I asked him if I could use it too. Every Christmas, my older daughter and my younger one is more visual. My older one, I read to her literally until she was 12 or 13 years old every night, until she finally said to me, Dad, enough, no more. And it obviously disappointed me, but I loved reading to my children. But every Christmas Eve, for both of them, we read The Night Before Christmas. But we always read it from the same book, the same one, the same illustrations. And as the years went by, my older daughter married a man from Texas. They lived in the Boston area, but she would go down and visit his family on Christmas Eve. She made me put it on YouTube, my reading it, so that she could first watch it. And now with FaceTime and all that, if she's out of town, I have to read it on FaceTime on that copy, on that book. And if you ask me what I think one of the most valuable books I have, that's it. And a lot of times, like I say too, it's the characters. I'm going to tell one more story about customers and characters, and then maybe we can do some questions, and then I'll do the appraisals. Again, you never know what's going to have people, what they're going to like, what they're going to do. In characters and customers, we have a customer who comes in every day. He calls in sick when he's not coming in. I mean, he's a customer, not an employee. And he's always afraid that we're going to put a book out that he'd be interested in that day and someone else would buy it. So he calls in sick to tell us not to put anything out. But there was a time I bought a collection of of cookbooks. A couple of thousand books. Some of them went back in the 1800s. Great collection. But there were also 2 boxes of pamphlets, like how to make Jell-O, how to use a mix master, those little pamphlets. A lot of them are a lot of fun. They're very colorful. But I told one of my assistants, I said, look, just put them all out on our dollar tables. Some are worth more than that, but the time and effort, and we've got this great collection to deal with. About an hour later, a customer comes running in with one of the pamphlets, absolutely thrilled. This man, he was beside himself. He was so excited. He was going, I've been looking for this for years and years and years, and it's only $1. And he hands it to me, and the title is Coconuts and Constipation. So you never, ever know what's going to turn someone on. In any case, I can go on like this. I will say right now, I'll probably mention the end, I do the podcast. They're 15 or 20 minutes. There's stories like this. So if you like the stories, look to Brattlecast. And I put one out every 2 weeks, and there are about 85 of them. So in any case, are there some questions that I can go off tangents anyways?
Yes, we have one question so far. Does the value of a rare book increase or decrease based on what's happening with the economy?
The question is, does the value increase? Yeah, of course it can depend on the economy. It's an interesting thing now with the pandemic as to what's happening, but there are a lot of other things that can increase or decrease the value. Sometimes if a movie comes out, like Titanic a number of years ago, when that came out, books about the Titanic and so on came a lot more interesting. Sometimes it's a temporary thing. Sometimes it's a more permanent. Just a few weeks ago, the whole thing about the Dr. Seuss books came out. And copies of books that should be $5 and $6 at the most were selling for hundreds of dollars on eBay. I think the news came out, they're going to stop publishing these. They weren't banning them, they just weren't publishing them. All of a sudden, the news, they went up tremendously, but there are millions of copies of those books. They'll slide back. So events can take differences. The economy, I mean, if you hit a really, really bad part in the economy, like back in the 30s in the Depression, people didn't have money. Everything went down, and it definitely can affect it. With COVID, it's really interesting what's happening. Used bookstores like I have, I mean, there's limits on how many people can come in. We were closed for 3 months. There aren't people in the offices in the city. There aren't tourists. And, you know, business is definitely off to a degree. We've managed to stay in business, and we're going to stay in business. But auctions have gone tremendously up in value, and it will settle down. But what happened was a lot of people, first of all, some needed money, so books were coming out to auction. Second thing that was happening, people weren't spending money because you couldn't go anywhere and do anything. The stock market was going up, so people had money. They were bored, so they got on and they were bidding things up, sometimes to unrealistic prices, but prices for the really rare books, they tend to stay more even than things that sort of go up and down with time and period. Also, there are some authors that, you know, are very popular in their time and era. And then as the people who collected and read and loved them get older and the new generation comes on, it might not be the same books. Hemingway right now is still collected and valuable, but maybe not quite as much so as 10 or 15 years ago, because the people who read and grew up on Hemingway now are more selling things than buying. And the younger people, it might be other authors or titles. Years ago, Horatio Alger, the sort of Strive and Succeed, they were tremendously collected in very high prices. But the people who grew up on Horatio Alger, now, if any of them are still alive, those were what they grew up. Whereas now the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, those maybe are the things that are being collected. And then going beyond that, some of the series that are for younger people now will be more interesting in the future. So it depends on a lot of things, supply and demand. But yeah, if the economy really tanks, everything goes down. An interesting thing from my point of view, what really affects my business in many ways is that we buy mostly, the main reason people sell books is they're either moving from the big house to the small house, in, you know, small apartment, older couple, or an estate. Well, right now, people aren't moving a lot. And if real estate isn't selling, they're not moving. If they're not moving, they're not selling everything in their houses or downsizing. And that actually affects us more than almost anything else in the economy, is the real estate market, which you wouldn't necessarily think of, but it's fun. So it does, it always will, but some things go up, some go down, and if there are specifics, then I can answer that a little too. If there's only the one question, I'll actually...
We do have some more.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
And that last question actually sort of ties in a little bit to our next one. Are younger people collecting, or are collectors a dying breed?
No, younger people definitely collecting. They might not be collecting the same thing, but yes, they definitely are. And even though so much is now on computers and reading virtually or electronically, people are still collecting. Matter of fact, we found a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, books are retro, and they actually are collecting them more now than they were maybe a few years ago. So they definitely are. They just might be collecting different things. It's maybe things from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, that style. The fashion, the trends, the ideas from when they were growing up. So yes, they still collect. They're still interested. Now, one type of thing that definitely has gone down in value is anything that people used to, I don't know if you'd collect, but accumulate, that they just need the information and only the information. How many people have bought an encyclopedia recently, a dictionary? Uh, but it goes beyond that. If art books, a lot of those big, beautiful art books that used to have the, if you wanted to see a picture of Picasso or Van Gogh, now you can just go online, and quite honestly, the computers, if it's a good screen, are probably better. So a lot of art books that were very valuable have gone down in value. Uh, Cookbooks, in some cases, aren't quite as asked for because you can get the recipes. Uh, so things like that tend to have gone down. And it even is a little more extreme. I had a friend who retired. He was looking for books on how to play tennis. He was going to take up tennis in his retirement. And we had a few books. And he looked at them, how to play tennis. He goes, you know, YouTube is much better because you can actually see people taking the strokes and learning. So even that sense of information, pure information, has gone down, but people still collect. They still are collecting both books, autographs, manuscripts, and so on. That thrill of touching the original, the first, something signed by, is still there, and they like it. And hopefully they will continue to like it. They seem to. Any
And
other?
yes, what is your opinion on selling books to a dealer versus trying to sell by yourself online? And how do you find a good dealer to work with?
Well, I'm a great dealer. No, but it's a question that comes up a lot. First of all, one of the things that I will say, if you don't know what you're doing, there are sites on the internet. There's Bookfinder, ABE Books, Adall. There's a whole list. The people can get in touch if they really want to find. I'm sure the reference librarians at the Buffalo can also help them out with that. But one of the things we a lot of times say to people, they'll say, well, we're making a list. And we say, no, right behind me, you can see, if someone took a picture of this shelf, not each individual book, and I can read and see the spines, you can get us 500, 1,000 books really quickly, and I can look that over, or a good book dealer can look it over and say, oh, you have a valuable collection. You don't have a valuable collection. The third book from the right on the second shelf down, we need to see that more. So that's a great way to start. A lot of people will say to me, well, we can sell them on eBay, on the internet, and so on. And I say, absolutely, you can. The problem is, if you have to photograph the book, describe the book, you have to list it, you have to take emails, and I assure you, you'll get a lot of what you might consider dumb emails. You then have to get payment, then have to pack the book and ship it. Well, if you're talking books that are worth $5, $10, $15, and you spend an hour selling it, yeah, you can get more money if you have all that time, as opposed to maybe getting $2, $3, $5 from a dealer. But it's the time and effort that goes into that. Now, when you're talking to the much higher price books, yeah, you can do it, although then you're not sure what it is. Also, if you're dealing with a dealer that you know, you feel comfortable with and reputable, you get a check and it's there, or you get paid and you know that the payment's good. Also, when you look on these sites to try to get an idea of value, one of the things I caution people is these are tools. And like every other tool, if you know how to use it, it's great. If you introduced me to a cabinet maker and showed me their tools, and I tried to do it, I probably would hit my thumb with a hammer and it would be all swollen, whereas they could make a great cabinet. I tell people the first thing to look at when you look books up online, don't look at what the price is. Don't look at any descriptions. Look at how many. If you start having 10, 20, 50, 100 copies online, that tells you immediately that there are 10, 20, 50, 100 copies online that whatever the price is, aren't selling. And it's not like oh, one's $100, one's $5, so I'll go somewhere in the middle. If you're going to buy that book and they're all about the same, you buy the cheapest. It brings it down to the lowest common denominator. The other thing the internet has done is 20, 30 years ago, before the internet, if you went into a bookstore and saw a book and it was priced high, you'd say, well, I've got to buy that book because it's a rare book. I'll never see it when I need it. When am I ever going to get another one? Now you might go click on a computer, find 20 copies of the book. You realize it really was just hard to find. It wasn't rare. And the price has come way down because it really wasn't that rare a book. Also, all those people that you envision with books all behind them, the scholar, so that they could reach up and say, oh, Napoleon fought the Battle of Waterloo. Well, you don't need those books anymore because you find it online. Or, there are 20 books online. You say, I'll buy it when I need it. Then you end up never needing it, so you never buy it. So it affects a lot of things, but I would say find a good book dealer that you like. If you're not sure about the prices, get 2 or 3 opinions. Or if you want to look it up yourself, maybe approach a dealer, myself or others that ask nicely. And at least we can go through it and say, look, if you want to double check, you've got 200 books listed here. Check this one, this one, this one, and this one. And we might get it down to 10% that you actually have to spend the time on. And we can speed it up and help you out that way.
Can you comment on collecting books by African-American authors?
I would comment on collecting books by almost any subject area field that you can think of, but there is a tremendous amount of book collecting on African-American authors. And you can do it from anywhere from relatively recent books to older books, to rare books, to just used books. It's an area right now that are very much collected. We actually, about a month ago, got a very nice collection on African-American authors and on history. And one of the things that was interesting was one of the books was an autobiography of Frederick Douglass. It wasn't a great copy. It was an early edition, and it was worth a few $100s. But when we did some investigating, we looked a little more, and it was actually inscribed by Frederick Douglass, which made everybody happy, but it was to another person. We did some research on that other person, and it turned out he was a slave who was freed and then became one of the first not state senators, but US senators, I think from Mississippi, right after the Civil War. So here's a book by an ex-slave, his autobiography, that the ex-slave signed and inscribed to another ex-slave who then became a US senator. And so that went from being a few hundred to a few thousands of dollars. Also, old newspapers, a lot of the old newspapers about African-American, either the books on anti-slavery or ones put out by them, are fascinating. Here's another one that I got that you might not think of, but sort of extends how you can extend out in a field. I one time got a copy of Jackie Robinson's autobiography. It's a very common book. It's a $10 book. It's nothing that special. But the copy that we had was inscribed to a woman, and it said, Miss So-and-so, thank you very much for letting me stay in your house in New York when I first moved there. And what happened, you have to stop and think, Jackie Robinson, when he first went to New York for the major leagues, nobody would rent to him because he was Black. Nobody would rent in a decent area that he could not rent. So this family said, look, come and live with us for the year. He became obviously a bigger star. He bought a house and moved in. But even that, he couldn't rent a house in New York. So that's also an extension of the Black authors, Black history. And, you can get back to the Harlem Renaissance, you can get back to the slavery periods. Phyllis Wheatley, who wrote a collection of poetry in the 1700s, was the first African-American woman author in the United States. And her books can go for $10,000 or $20,000 or more. So when you say any subject, it can get narrowed down or extended. And yes, they are very collectible.
Those are all the questions we have.
Okay, well, why don't I had 2 or 3 appraisal that people asked about. If they're listening, they'll hear it. If not, they'll probably get in touch. And like I say, if we don't get to it, they can always get in touch afterwards. Someone sent in a book called Thackeray's London. I hate to say it, it's a relatively dull book. It had a letter from the author who wrote it, but it was in an absolutely deluxe, gorgeous leather binding. I mean, absolutely beautiful, beautifully done, tool done by a binder who's known. So in this case, you absolutely can tell a book by its cover, because the book without this beautiful binding with the letter, with all the deluxe part of it, is a $10 to $20, $30 book. In this gorgeous binding, which was put out at the time as a deluxe edition, it's probably sell for $300 to $500, but it's all about how the book looks, not necessarily the content of it. And quite honestly, most people who don't know who Thackeray is anymore. Another book we got in, or 2 books. One was a religious book from the 1890s, 1880s, 90s on religious painting. It was in black and white. The condition was so-so. The religious books from the late 1800s, there are millions of them. And unless there's something extraordinary about them, there isn't a big demand. They also had a book of Browning that was put out around the 1890s at a very puffy binding. It was actually part of a whole series. They had Browning's poems, Emerson's poems, Longfellow's poems, everybody's poems, put out in a series. In good condition, it sells for $25. This one wasn't in great condition, so it's a few dollars. And what I like to say sometimes to people when I see a book in bad condition, I like to say to them, well, the fact that it's in bad condition doesn't really hurt the value that much, because in good condition, it's not worth much. So in any case, and then probably the most outstanding things that I got asked to talk about. Someone from the library sent in, and they were asking about the Little Leather Library. And there was also a sort of a corresponding group of books called the Little Blue Book. And these were little pamphlet-sized books. They'd be about that big, maybe 30 to 50 pages. And they became very popular when commuting first started. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, as cities started to expand and there were horse-drawn trolleys, or they started with steam trolleys or whatever, people were commuting. And sometimes that commute would take a half an hour. They commuted in those days too. And these little books, the Little Leather Library or the Little Blue Book, were put out in huge, huge numbers, usually for a nickel or a dime. And people could easily read them while they were on the trolley or commuting, but there are millions of them. Almost every time we do an Antiques Roadshow, someone comes in with a box or 2 of them, and you look at a whole box of 25, 50 of them, you go, well, it's worth $10, $20, $50 depending on it, but they aren't valuable. The 2 things that were asked about that were valuable were from the library, from the rare books. And one of them was an Albert Hubbard, Letters to Garcia, which is one of his most popular and famous books. And Albert Hubbard, obviously, the Roycrofters and the beautiful craftsmanship, and people collect their books a lot. And obviously it's relatively close by. This was a copy in a beautiful leather binding, which the craftsmen at Roycrofters did the binding, I'm assuming, because that's how they usually are. And there was a long letter of Albert Hubbard's talking about the publication, how successful the book was. That could easily be $1,500, $2,500, and maybe even a little bit more. I'd want to see it before I got a little more aggressive on it. But the Roycrofters bindings in good shape are hard to get. People love them. Letters talking about the Roycrofter books of Albert Hubbard are very much collected. And there are a lot of the Roycrofters items that they sold because that's how they supported their community. And they're fairly common, collected, but they have to be in good condition. But then there are sort of the few outstanding ones. And then there was a letter of George Washington from the 1776 talking about troops and so on. And anything, I assure you, anything signed by George Washington is valuable. The more content, the more interesting it is, the more valuable. Also, the fact that it's actually in his hand and signed. This letter is a good letter from 1776, and I would say probably conservatively $25,000, $30,000. 50 wouldn't shock me. Might be a little bit on the higher end, but George, and again, if you get to touch something that George Washington held and touched, I mean, it's hard to describe that this piece of paper was within his hand. He put down his thoughts and ideas. And just by touching that letter, you're almost bringing yourself back to a connection with George Washington. And that's one of the reasons people will pay so much and why people collect and treasure this so much. I'm going to actually end, we're running a little bit over. I'm going to tell one last story about Bibles. And one of the reasons I like to finish with Bibles is because that's one of the things that we get asked about the most. People come in, they have their family Bibles. Almost always I have to tell them, if it's your family Bible, sentimentally it's priceless, monetarily maybe not so much. In any case, I got called to a large old church, well over 100-year-old church. And they had a large library and just accumulated books over the years. And I spent a day at the church. It was a beautiful old church. It was great stained glass windows. I like stained glass windows. They actually had some good books. It was fun. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There are a few more books to look at. I looked at the books. They were nice. And then there was this closet. It was actually more like a small room off in a corner. The priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest. I said, what is this? He says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We don't want to, offend anybody. We very graciously accept it. And then go downstairs, open the door, put it in the closet with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That just would be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, it's great. But if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. Like I say, I'll sort of end on that note. If you have any questions, ideas, listen to the podcast, any appraisals we didn't get to, just, Google Brattle Book Shop. It will all come up. If you're in Boston, come in and visit. And boy, would I like to get out to Buffalo and be able to do one of these. Maybe there'll be an Antiques Roadshow. Who knows? But I'll look forward to when we can do it more live. And one of the last things I'll leave you with, and this gets back to the question about someone asking about going to book dealers and so on. If you don't know something and you either go to your librarian and ask or go to the book, most people who are doing this are doing because they love it and they enjoy it. One of the biggest problems when you ask someone who love and enjoy what they're doing a question is not getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. In any case, I'll leave on that. Thank you very much.
Ken, thank you very, very much. I could listen to those stories all day long.
Well, I will hold up here. I have a sheets with 9 pages of one line or sentence. Every one of them is a story. Listen wonderful. To the podcast.
I know the podcast I'm going to sign up for now. So I want to thank Ken, and I want to thank all of our viewers this afternoon. To contact Ken directly, you can visit www.brattlebookshop.com. Now, please keep in mind that librarians can help you get to the tools that can give you a sense of the value of books, but we are not at liberty to appraise your books. You must see a professional appraiser like Ken for that purpose. That said, we do hope to see you all in person at the Downtown Central Library soon to visit and use our local history and genealogy resources in the Grosvenor Room, and to see our current exhibits where you will find many of our rare book treasures on display. Don't forget to visit our Facebook page at buffalolibrary.central to see the recording of today's program. The library system website is www.buffalolib.org, or you can call us at 716-858-8900. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please stay safe and have a wonderful afternoon.
And I want to thank you for hosting this. Thank you.